Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. As people continue to sign in, please enjoy our very brief video that announces ULI Toronto's 4th major symposium since 2015, which is coming up this November. As you saw, that was a little teaser. So we'll be, ULI Toronto is hosting a milestone environmental, social, and governance symposium November the 4th, where we will explore the current and future urgencies facing our industry, the leaders who are championing them, and the communities that they impact. So details for this event will be posted in the chat. Okay, it's 12:01 p.m. So I think we will get started here. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeannie Shim. I'm a partner in PMA 360 and president and founder of Housing Lab Toronto. I'm pleased to welcome you today to today's session, which is backed by popular demand, Market Pulse Check Part 2. Toronto's crane explosion continues. Now, before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items to go through. So if you can just bear with me. First, we'll start very importantly with a land acknowledgement. As a Toronto region-based organization, we acknowledge the land that we are meeting on virtually is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is also now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, as immigrants, and newcomers in this generation and generations past. We also acknowledge and honor those who came here involuntarily, particularly descendants from those who were brought here through enslavement. ULI Toronto stands in solidarity with Indigenous communities, demanding action and accountability for the ongoing legacy of the residential school system. To better understand the meaning behind this land acknowledgement, we recommend 4 programs that we have uploaded to the ULI Toronto YouTube channel, and these links are available in the chat. 13,000 Years of Indigenous History in the GTA, Whose Land and Whose Law, Indigenous Toronto, The Stories of Our City Paved Over, and Colonialism, Enslavement, and Abolition in the Greater Golden Ocean. So we really encourage you to check those out when you have a moment. So next, some housekeeping issues before we get going. Everyone will be automatically muted throughout the session. Closed captioning is also available for this session. You can access it via the button along the bottom of the Zoom platform. We will not be facilitating a live Q&A session today in order to allow more discussion amongst our panelists. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to email them to toronto@uli.org and mention the name of the panelist to whom you'd like to direct your questions, and we will facilitate a response. This is also a recorded session, and the recordings will also be made available to you afterwards. And lastly, if you want to take the conversation online, please tag us with the handle @ULI Toronto or with the hashtag #AskGreatQuestions. 2 items to go through. Sponsors. Again, we couldn't have this event without acknowledging our sponsors. Today's event and all other ULI programming would not be possible with the support of our annual sponsors. I would like to say a huge thank you to all of them for their support. Now more than ever, ULI Toronto relies on the support of our sponsors to allow us to put on the quality programming that we do and to drive our mission, which is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. So to all of them, we say a big thank you. And lastly, just a note here that prices are going up on memberships. So if your membership is coming due soon, you should think about renewing. If you renew before October 1st, you can lock in your annual membership or monthly payments at the historically low prices only offered to Canadians. After this time, our pricing is going to be aligned more with international organization pricing, so our membership will rise probably about 30%. So if you haven't renewed and or your membership is coming due soon, please take advantage of this opportunity to renew before prices go up. Remember, it's members like you that help us to continue our transformative work in our communities. We look forward to continuing your access to the network, knowledge, and opportunities that help you to thrive. What else is there? And if you have any questions regarding your membership, you can contact us by emailing toronto@uli.org, or you can renew by telephone. Apparently the customer service department is on standby, 1-800-321-5011. So take advantage of that. Prices are going up 30% after October 1st. So I think with that, I think we are done with all of our housekeeping items, so we can probably get started here. So welcome again. The topic today is a market pulse check, and good timing right after our kind of Groundhog Day election, as you know, and we're going to talk about the Crane Index, which we talked about earlier this year in May as well. The Crane Index has set a new record again, and Mel and Edward are going to both speak about that. But, you know, with the fourth wave upon us, GDP growth maybe not rebounding back as quickly as everyone had hoped for. What does this all mean? Which is why we've brought our panel back together again to share their thoughts and outlook on the residential and commercial real estate markets. And we'll also get some highlights from the actual Rider Levett Bucknall Crane report. And we have Edward from joining us as well from Urban Toronto and Skyrise Cities to share some insights on cranes in the 905 region. So without further delay, let me introduce our first speaker today. Our first speaker is Mel Youngblood. He's the principal at Rider Levett Bucknall, and we've placed his bio in, the chat, and I'll pass it over to you, Mel, for your presentation.
Good afternoon, folks. Thank you, Jeannie, for that introduction. And thank you for the invite back to give you a bit of an update on the latest crane count. Something a little bit different on this Q3 pass for 2021, and it's been fully coordinated with our friends who are on the call today at Urban Toronto. So they were a big help when it came to kind of coordinating the cranes that we were counting around the city and what they were showing on their website. So Edward can obviously elaborate on that a bit more when we get there, but we were glad to be to use at least the information on their website and coordinate our crane count. So go to the next slide. Yeah, here we go. Obviously Toronto continues to be the top of the heap. And some folks might say, well, why are you only counting 14 cranes in 14 major cities in the US and Canada? Well, that's because those are the 14 cities that ROB has boots on the ground, offices in those cities, to be able to have the resources to count cranes. So that's why you only see 14. Toronto's still the leader, was back in April and in May when we counted. We're up another 17 cranes in the city to a total of 225 from a previous 208 just a few months back. It's nice to see almost it's an over 8% increase. And again, going back to just a milestone, February 2020, almost double the number of cranes that were in the city at that time. So good to see, because that really means that if a crane's coming off a site somewhere in the city, one's going back on, and we've added 17. So it's certainly an indication of some construction activity there for sure. The increase in the mixed use numbers that you're going to see on the next slide is really a coordination with our friends at Urban Toronto. They have a lot more information about the actual projects that the cranes reside on. So we were able to use that information to kind of better categorize the projects. So you've seen a little bit of a change from what might have been previously categorized as a residential project is now perhaps mixed use based on that information that comes off Urban Toronto's website. And so, yeah, still the case. Across the board on the 14 cities, residential projects represent about 40% of the total crane count. And in Toronto, that's closer to 60%. So obviously the majority there are sitting on residential projects. Nice to see, since the last count, 4 cranes were added to educational type projects, which is, I think, a sign of the future. Some investment there in infrastructure on the educational side, institutional side. And then an obvious, because of COVID, drop from 19 cranes to 12 on commercial projects. Not surprising to see some of those drop away, in the COVID environment. So the next slide just elaborates on the numbers for the Toronto count. And you'll see there that back in kind of January and July of 2019, we were about half the number of cranes that are currently being counted in the city. 104 and 120, now 225. And you can see that the changes in other parts of the 14 cities, subtle, fairly subtle. Probably one of the biggest centers outside of Toronto that gets counted is Los Angeles. A sizable increase up to 51 cranes there in LA. So again, Toronto leads the pack across the board. And just because Urban Toronto's in the mix, and Edward's going to count, or at least provide counts on some cranes that are outside of the GTA. Crystal, if you want to go to the next slide, I just want to confirm for the folks, the boundaries, at least for our crane index, the RLB crane count, is really the city proper, the 25 wards, having just gone through an election. It's really the net 25 wards that we count cranes in. Steeles Avenue on the north, 427 on the west, Markham Road on the east, and of course Lake Ontario on the south. So that kind of confirms where we're counting cranes for the folks that may have that question. Hey, where are you stopping when starting counting on the cranes? So that's pretty much it for my presentation, Jeannie. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Mel. Now we're going to hand it over to to Edward Skira. He's the president and co-publisher of skyrisecities.com and urbantoronto.ca. We've placed his bio in the chat, and we invited Edward so that he could share some numbers on the crane count in the 905 region, because we know in the greater Toronto area, it isn't just 416, a lot of activity happening in 905. So over to you, Edward.
Hello, thank you all. Thank you, Mel. Yes, we at Urban Toronto, we've been publishing for about 20 years, and we've been tracking construction the entire time. So we are going to talk a little bit about 905 here. If we could go to the second page, the present. So let's go to page 3. So our number is a little higher for 416 only because we updated it a couple of days ago. The numbers do move up and down, but basically what Mel said is correct for Toronto. That is a very stunning number. 905 is about half of what Toronto proper is at 109. Total GTA, according to what we're tracking, is 336 cranes across. And if we go to the next screen, I will show you a more comprehensive breakdown of the GTA. So 905, Brampton 8, Burlington 5, Markham 14, Mississauga 21, and so forth. So we can certainly see that some of the larger cities in the 905 are the ones that are leading the pack. That is not surprising, clearly. The cities that are closer to Toronto, the Mississaugas, Vaughns, they're getting the overflow from Toronto. And the transportation is better connected to Toronto proper. And so there is quite a bit of growth. I'm sure if we looked at the 905 crane count 10 years ago, we probably have very little there. One of the big trends clearly in the GTA is not only that there's major growth in Toronto proper, but the Toronto suburbs, the 905, are growing, and they're growing up. Land is disappearing there for subdivisions and single family dwellings. And so they're also being forced now to grow up. And that's exactly what's happening here. We do have the 416 crane count there broken down by ward. It is interesting to look at Ward 10, which is Spadina, Fort York downtown, which encompasses half the financial district and the entertainment district and, towards the CNE, that whole area. They have 28 cranes. So there isn't a single city in the 905 that has more than Ward 10 does. Not so really surprising, but I think that over time, as we look at this, you're going to see that 905 is definitely going to continue to grow and grow significantly. I think part of it also has to do with the fact that land is getting harder to find, particularly in downtown Toronto. All the developable sites are starting to fill up, at least, I mean, there's definitely still room, but it's getting a little tighter. I know when we talk to developers, they're having a harder time finding land, particularly downtown. So they're going to have to look further afield. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is, we've just launched a new service called Urban Toronto Pro, which is our database service, and it shows it shows all the projects in our database. There's almost 2,400 projects in our database currently, and this is a map of, it's a heat map, in fact, of all the projects in our database, and you can see the area that we're looking at. So it's Burlington at the bottom left, out to Oshawa, and then north to Newmarket, and all in between. So red clearly means heavy development and so forth. So this gives you a great idea of what's happening across the GTA entirely. In terms of 905, you can see that Oakville has a bunch of places along Dundas and towards sort of the old downtown. Burlington, downtown Burlington has quite a bit going on. Vaughan Metropolitan Center, the strip along Yonge Street heading north into Richmond Hill, and so forth. So lots of development out there, and this really highlights where it's kind of happening. Let's go to the next slide. So this is all the cranes in the GTA from what we've been tracking. The red is what Mel was looking at, and the green is the ones that we are looking at today, specifically the 905. So again, an overview of what's happening: Mississauga, Oakville, Brampton, downtown Markham has a huge concentration, in downtown Vaughan, and so forth. Next slide, please. So we remove 416. Here is 905 in its glory, and you know, again, it just re-emphasizes where the development is taking place. Next slide. So now we can look quickly at the future. I know we'll be talking a little bit about it in the panel, but let's go to the next slide. This will give you a great overview of what's happening. So this is a map of every project that's in our database. It's 1,095, or sorry, 98 that are considered pre-construction. So this is not under construction. This is not complete. This is everything that's proposed. Now, not all of this is gonna be built. You know, there are definitely proposals here that may be rejected or whatever that is, but that's going to be a small number. These are not all crane worthy either. There may be projects here like townhomes that are not, wouldn't have a crane for the most likely, but the vast majority of these are definitely high rise. They are every category essentially. So we're looking here not just at residential, but commercial and so forth. So 1,098 proposals. How many of these will turn into cranes tomorrow? Probably none, but over time, I mean, when I say pre-construction, these pins represent projects that might have gotten to the city yesterday or when we put this proposal together. So let's say a week ago. So clearly those would take you know, a few years before they were crane worthy, but a lot of these are going through the process. So it's a massive amount of development that's coming. I'll be able to talk further about that later. You know, as Mel indicated, we are able to also break all this information up into, you know, very targeted information. So, you know, the height of all the buildings, how many units, all that kind of stuff. But because I only had a few minutes, I just wanted to show an overview. So this is what we're looking forward to in the next, let's say, 10 years. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Edward. And thank you, Mel, for sharing your latest data on the number of cranes and proposed development stuff in the pipeline. We know it's going to take a decade maybe for that stuff to come to market. But anyway, it's really interesting. So now we're going to move over to the panel discussion, and I'm going to introduce our speakers briefly, just so we can kind of maximize our discussion time, and all their bios will be put in the chat room. So first we have with us Andy Brether, Executive Chairman and Broker of Record of PMA Brether Realty Group. We have Badr El Khatib, he's a vice president at Centrecorp. We have Barbara Lawlor, she's a CEO and broker of record at Baker Real Estate Incorporated. And we have Raymond Wong, Vice President of Data Operations and Data Solutions at Altus Group. So these are the panels who had joined us earlier this year. So they're back to share some of their updated thoughts on what's been happening since back in May. And before we dive into the Crane reports and everything, we have to talk about the election that just happened. You know, I'd like to get your thoughts from all the everyone on the panel here, including Mel and Edward, on the Groundhog Day federal election that was just experienced. All the parties made a lot of promises on housing and affordability, and Canadians, we cast our ballots on Monday, and now we have the same government we had before the election. So two-part question. One, what are your thoughts on this old new government in terms of their potential impact on the real estate market? And it's a one-word answer only, good, bad, or ugly. So why don't we start with Andy?
Oh, it's easy. I'm in mourning. It's ugly, but I bracket that with I'll call it a crisis and opportunity.
Okay, we can
I'll
dive
explain
into
on
that
that later.
Okay, so ugly. Andy says ugly. Barbara? Good, bad, or ugly? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Mark. Oh, there
I
we go.
had to bring my own word, Jeannie, and my word is promising.
Oh, okay. Better? Good, bad, or ugly?
I don't know how I feel about this. I'm going to go with ugly because I don't believe they have a good answer for real estate.
Okay. Raymond?
I'm going to be optimistic and say good.
Oh, okay. Mel, your thoughts?
I'm going to stick with Andy on this one. I think in the long run, it's going to be ugly.
Okay. And Edward, where do you weigh in?
I'm sort of lukewarm. I'm thinking that it's really a provincial and a city matter, and the feds are not really the main element here that we should be considering.
Okay, great. Well, you can see already from the responses, we have a great panel, a lot of diverse opinions here. And the second part of this question is, if you could give this new old government one piece of advice in terms of any action they should take on housing and affordability, what would that be? Andy, why don't we start with you again? One piece of advice.
It's hard for me to do. I'm full of pieces of advice. If there's one, I will just suggest that part of the thrust at the federal level is really trampling over provincial and municipal jurisdictions. Is kind of interesting, but the most all of the emphasis continues to be on the demand side of the equation and not supply. So I'm going to say that as a piece of advice, I'm going to recommend, perhaps as I'll borrow from Peter Gilgan from BNN the other night, where he said it's a war on affordability. And in fact, it's really a war on supply. And I think that the intent should be a national conference, maybe even a royal commission. The feds could enact this with all stakeholders, and we'll call it the housing crisis of supply, and see where that goes.
Great. Barbara, what's your one piece of advice you'd give?
I agree that supply is the really big issue. But I would also speak for the first-time buyers. I would increase their amount that they can use from their RRSPs. They're young, they have plenty of time on their side to grow their RRSPs as their careers grow. And plus, we all know that real estate investment contributes greatly to a retirement portfolio. I would extend the maximum amortization period so that they can lower their monthly payments and continue the programs that are in place to help the first-time buyers with affordability, like the first-time home buyers incentive plan, GST, HST, new housing rebate, home buyers amount of up to $750 in federal tax relief, and in Ontario, a rebate on some of the required land transfer tax, all of those.
Okay, so one piece of advice, really focusing on first-time buyers.
Yes.
Great. Badr, what would be your one piece of advice?
Yeah, those are both really all-encompassing, but I think where I go with this, and it is on the supply side as well. So I don't sound like a broken record, but I would say, don't have Band-Aid solutions and invest particularly in skilled labor. Part of the affordability crisis has to do with a lack of skilled labor to get these buildings and homes built at a practical and cost-effective price point. So invest in skilled labor. I know there's a lot of different programs, but invest heavily. Let's not focus on Band-Aid solutions. Let's focus on long-term solutions and do it immediately.
Right, Raymond, your perspective and then more the commercial side?
Well, the positive side is that this is getting attention. And this is a global issue. It's not just a Canada and Toronto issue. And all the major global markets are having issues with affordability based on pricing and sort of labor. And it was said earlier, but the feds really have to work with all levels of government. And like Andy's comment with having a meeting of the minds and trying to attack and figure out what the issues are and having a common goal with them. Because it seems right now that everyone's just working independently.
Great. Mel, your thoughts?
Oh, I think it's all been well said there from the group, but yeah, no, I think it needs a bit more focus on who needs housing side as to who's supplying it. And Andrew touched on it. I think there needs to be a bit more collaboration between what the feds want to see, and what the big cities want to see, particularly Toronto, in terms of affordable housing and how to meet that demand for, affordable type housing, right? As opposed to just building it, putting it out there and hoping for the best. So yeah, no, I would say kind of more focus on who needs it, right? And then more collaboration, right? From the feds.
Edward, last word to you. What would you be your one piece of advice?
Yeah, again, I think it's a provincial and a city matter, and I think it's a zoning issue, and I think it's like in Toronto with the yellow belt. It is really weird to me that somebody could build a 5,000 square foot house next door to mine and have 2 people living in it, but they can't build a triplex that has 8 people living in it. So I think we really need to look at that. If you're going to take 70% of Toronto and make it single family only with nothing else allowed, of course you're going to have trouble with affordability. There should be room for triplexes and duplexes and all that kind of stuff throughout the city. And that's a city issue and a provincial issue.
Great, thank you. And maybe at ULI Toronto, we'll see if we can get this recording in front of all 3 levels of government. So lots of good practical advice shared from people who are on the ground. So thank you. So now let's turn back to the Crane reports with our first question. So since we met earlier this year in May, as you know, the pandemic's continuing, our economy is starting to recover, but the crane count has continued to grow. So what do these numbers mean to you? And what is your key takeaway from the latest crane counts? Andy, we'll start with you.
Well, I think it's a marvelous report. I loved it when I saw it for the first time, and I think it's just an absolutely sensational piece of work. And thank you to Urban Toronto for adding 905 and then digging into future. Most of it is driven by yesterday's news. I mean, this is product that sold 4 and 5 years ago. So the potential development side is probably as more important a graph as anything presented today. And the critical side of that is really related to, and I'm going to sound like I'm harping on this, but I've been doing it for years, I guess. And that's really a better balance in housing provision of a broader choice of product. Intensification from 2004-06 really moved the needle, and we've seen it strongly. It's now 65% of our absorption level in high rise. And we restricted and limited the low rise development opportunities, causing the underlying prices to escalate unimaginably. So there needs to be a balance, and that's really where the target goes. And I love what the Crane report has done. I think we need to have a universal report on supply, which has been wanting, and it was wanting from the Liberal government previously in the early 2s as they canceled projects that we were doing with CMHC and others on this matter, and it needs to be brought forward. So I'd expand that Crane report to a supply report. It's extremely important, particularly on the low rise or lower density forms of housing. And it doesn't, when you say low density, I don't want to get pinned in the corner of single family 5,000 square feet. It's quite the opposite. This is stacks, back to backs, towns, densities that are running at 30, 40 units per acre, not 100 and 200 units per acre like high rise. But we need more balance within the system to stabilize prices in the long term. And we need it quickly. So I love it. I love the report. It stimulates a lot of discussion.
Great. Barbara, what are your thoughts on the crane reports?
I think Toronto has been pretty consistent with more construction cranes in place than most major cities in North America. And pandemic aside, we still outrank places like Boston, Los Angeles, and Washington. This is a great thing for Toronto and the GTA. The fact that these buildings are under construction makes quite a statement about the health of new real estate. You know, Jeannie, that to obtain financing for construction to go ahead, developers have to sell 75% of their units. And now that construction cranes are in place, they're likely more than 75% sold. This graph of the cranes really paints a picture of Toronto expanding and growing more into the international city that it has become. And I'm also encouraged by the number of cranes in the 905 areas. The strength in both Toronto and the suburbs is encouraging. And of course, the market will explode even more as more international students land and other foreigners immigrate once the borders fully opens to them. My key takeaway from these latest crane counts is that the numbers means that the pandemic has not put a stop to industry progress, despite what the media may report. Our industry is amazingly resilient, and this is visible proof of that fact.
Great, thanks, Barbara. Bader, your company accounts for some of those cranes in the crane count. What are your thoughts on the report and what are your key takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few key takeaways here from me. One, there's clearly confidence in the marketplace among developers. Projects that were shelved or delayed in 2020 due to COVID are now proceeding, have proceeded. And I think we're seeing that clearly in the numbers. I think the other big takeaway is, and I mentioned this I guess in my last comment, construction pressures, skilled labor shortage, rising construction costs has been a theme in Ontario, in the GTA in particular, for a while. Based on these numbers, my gut tells me that this can be a present theme for the foreseeable future. It's going to continue to be an impediment on improving housing supply, no question about that. And I think building on what Barbara said, more and more markets are now viable, right? And we're seeing the growth in the 905. What that tells me is developers feel they can buy land, rezone it, and sell it at a price point and make a margin on it to compensate for that risk. And I believe the numbers in the 905 are going to continue to rise, certainly in the medium and long term. And lastly, and this is a little bit more of a damper, I'm speculating here, but I believe sites are taking longer to develop and construct. I think part of the crane count here, and I can't tell from the numbers how many cranes are coming off each quarter versus coming on. I can't tell the net new additions. I think that would be a really interesting piece, Mel and Ed, to look at. But for me, if it is the latter, if things are taking longer to build, I think that is a little bit less exciting and a little bit more alarming. So that would be an interesting, call it maybe secondary piece to look at, whether it's this year or next as you're compiling your numbers.
Great, thank you, Bader. Ray, what do you think about these reports?
Well, I think it just reinforces, at least on the commercial side, that the downtown urban areas are quite viable. And despite all the discussion with work from home and the hollowing out of the downtown office, there's close to about 10 million square feet of office space under construction, with another about 4 million square feet in pre-leasing. So we've seen the rental levels for the apartments start to fill up again, and rents starting to move up. So it just reinforces that that people like to be downtown. And I think it's going to push the recovery of the office markets. And we've already seen the sort of increase in traffic. We haven't seen the increase in public transit yet, but I think it's going to take some time. So I think the Crane report reinforces the need to be for downtown and the viability, or at least the positive signs of the office market going forward. And again, under 9 million square feet of space under construction, 75% of that has already been pre-leased, and there hasn't been any type of cancellations. So again, another positive sign.
Great, thank you for your insights on the report. And Mel and Ed, I know you guys shared your thoughts, so if it's okay for the sake of time, we're going to move to the next question. So the next question is about each of you, your kind of experiences in the marketplace over this past year. Who's buying, where are they buying, why? Was there anything notable happening in the marketplace that made you take note? Stuff that you're watching for. So why don't we start? Andy, you can provide kind of a low rise, mid rise perspective. Barbara, you've got the high rise perspective. Batter, you've got the developer perspective. And Ray, I guess you can show your commercial perspective. So why don't we start with Andy? What's been your experience over the past, I guess since we last met? I know there's been some pushback on pricing on the low rise side.
For sure. Let me start with just a comment from Build on a study they did on the length of time it takes to bring a piece of land to market from the time of purchase to the actual delivery of a unit. And the average, ladies and gentlemen, is 10 years. This is just completely unacceptable. We have to move this much, much quicker. One of the issues really is we've been absorbing about 40,000 units a year, 65% of that high rise. And we should be in a city now pushing past 6.5 million, on its way to 9 million, in the range of 60,000 units a year. So we are falling behind, as the Jean-François Perrault report from Scotiabank showed, by 1.8 million housing units in Canada. We are just completely heading the wrong direction. So this isn't a war on affordability. Yes, there's price pushback now, which is bringing a bit of stability to the market, different from what we experienced in the spring. But we're at the lowest level of supply, as Raymond will tell you, that we have ahead on record in low-rise product. What that means going forward is the balance of this year into next, until we see movement in interest rates, is that anything we bring to market will sell out very, very quickly. And the price levels are holding a bit, but the pressures underlying of inflation, both for labor and material, are going to see continuing rising prices right through into 2022. Until interest rates maybe shock this market a little bit. That'll be the big unknown factor into 22 and 23. So that'd be my commentary right at this moment, where we're at and where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andy. Barbara, what's been your experience this year?
Well, Jeannie Baker has been selling new condominiums for over 28 years. And so far, 2021 is our best year ever. Our previous best year was 2017, where we sold more than 7,000 units, representing over $4 billion in sales. And this year, we're already outpacing that success. So we're on the front lines of selling. And I can tell you, there is no let up as far as we're concerned. This speaks volumes about the numbers of new homes and condos that are needed to help satisfy the demand. So who's buying? Basically everyone on the spectrum, from first-time buyers to families, empty nesters, and seniors. In new construction condominium sales, they're all investors. Of special note is the high percentage of sales in the 905 areas. Investors, they buy according to their pocketbooks, and many are taking advantage of the lower dollar amounts per square foot in the suburbs. This amounts to, like, it's $800 to $1,000 a square foot, as opposed to $1,400 plus in downtown Toronto. So investors believe in our model here, and why shouldn't they? They put down their deposits today, they watch their equity and return on investment grow over the years of construction. I know I'm optimistic, but I base my optimism on solid research. We're meticulous about collecting and analyzing data, and our results scream positivity. We have a huge pipeline for projects coming into the market in 2022. I already have dates on our calendar for launches in the first quarter for over 2,000 units. Sales have been brisk, especially with mortgage interest rates so low. And the pandemic aside, people are buying new homes and condos before those rates rise. Overall, Canadians are continuing their love affair with real estate, and I see that continuing well into the future.
Great, Barbara, thank you for your perspective. Bader, so things are selling, but I guess the real measure of success is if you actually make a profit on these projects. I mean, that's not the specific question, but what are your thoughts on what's been happening in the market this past year?
Well, you hit the nail right on the head. It's all about if the project is viable. And we've been fortunate enough to bring 3 projects to market in 2021 in the downtown proper and outer 416. And that represents approximately 700 units. So we have some really strong data, recent and relevant data to work with. And what we've seen is certainly a strong interest in the outer 416. And it's definitely driven by a combination of affordability and availability. We have seen also a lot of renewed interest in the downtown proper. And this is being driven by relative value. As Barbara mentioned, yes, the downtown proper is always going to be more expensive than the outer 416 or the 905. But these investor buyers or end users are always thinking to themselves, what can I buy? And absolute dollars do matter, but certainly where am I getting the best value proposition? And I think what we've seen is definitely the 905 getting a little bit more expensive, and people thinking to themselves, well, maybe for 10%, 15%, 20% more, I'd rather be at the corner of Main and Main. And so it's this teeter-totter approach to I would say, demand. But overall, very healthy, and yes, across the spectrum. We have buyers from all walks of life thinking about high-rise development as a place they either want to invest their money or build their future. 2 real items to note is the 905 representing 65% of new condo sales is unheard of. Naturally, there's less opportunity in the downtown as it gets developed, so it's not surprising. But what it tells me is the 905 now needs to catch up. Those markets are becoming viable at these price points for high-rise development, which is a positive thing. But we need the zoning and entitlement process to really allow those markets to flourish and take in that demand. So I think what we're going to see here is something really interesting. I actually think we're going to see more upward pressure on condo pricing. Despite what Andy said on the low rise, we always look at the spread between low rise and high rise. And that spread is back to where it was in 2017, despite recent weakness in low rise pricing. And if you believe, like I do, in reversion to the mean, that has to tighten up. So either low-rise pricing is going to come down or high-rise pricing is going to go up. I'm not going to predict which one is going to happen, but something has to happen in order to kind of get back to business as usual.
Interesting. Well, we'll ask you for the prediction at the end. Let's hold that thought. Raymond, what are your thoughts on what's been happening this past year or since we last met?
I'm just going to carry on the good news. Like overall investment activity compared to last year is up by 47%, and 2020 was that pause. But compared to 2019 to 2021, we're up by 25%. And for Toronto alone, compared to a year ago, we're up 60% in activity. And a large part of that is always the land story. So residential land, low rise and high rise have been quite active for the first half of this year, and continues to be strong from investors, in addition to your regular investment types like industrial and as well as multifamily. So we anticipate we're going to finish off the second half of the year strong, but it'd be interesting whether or not we actually beat the 2018 and 2019 numbers, So we're coming out of COVID that all the investors are off the sidelines and are looking for assets. And the office part we talked about, but there's some positive news as well with respect to office, that in third quarter, we're actually seeing the first time a slight decline in the office availability rate downtown. And this is after 6 straight quarters of increases, and the sublet space is down. And whether or not that continues with the new supply would be interesting. But it's one of the first positive news is that we've seen on the office side in the downtown. And with respect to industrial availability, still remains tight at less than 1% vacancy rate in the GTA, and as well as on the multifamily side. So overall, market fundamentals are coming back, and it's a positive story compared to the first bit of this year and going into the second half of 2021.
Okay, wow, that's a good variety of kind of perspectives, but overall, everyone seems to kind of feel generally kind of positive looking forward, which actually leads us to our next question, market opportunities. So as our vaccination rates continue to rise and hopefully a vaccine for our younger kids approved before the end of the year, our economy continues to reopen. We see our streets filling with people, our businesses, our offices are starting to get occupied again, and with our new COVID protocols and everything, and vaccine passports, et cetera. What kind of opportunities do you see looking forward in the upcoming months and years for your firm and the type of work you're engaged in? Anything in particular that you see jumping out at you? Andy, we'll start with you.
Well, let me say one thing. The Liberals have announced 1.4 million new housing units over the next several years. We don't know what that means. I suggest that it's probably an emphasis on social housing, which is critical, but we need to define what affordability is between social and market housing, and what, God forbid, please God forbid, the federal government becoming a builder. Oh my goodness gracious. But they're committed to that process. So there's an opportunity, a big one on the social housing side, particularly. Anything in 905 in the next year will be really strong, and anything of medium density, stacks, back-to-backs, towns, et cetera, tremendously strong. They're a little tricky to price because they push back a bit on price, but I think that's going to be stable. The market for small town Ontario is going to be very dramatic. I don't think we'll see as big a play of moving back from work from home or moving back to the urban environment as we may have thought it was going to happen. And the pressure on small town Ontario is going to be quite significant. There may be some supply alternative there. And then there's going to be a really interesting evolution of tenure. In other words, how do we, if we look at affordability from land lease to shared ownership to our conventional methods of buying a particular home, and how does that dealt with? I mean, when I did a comparison between 1991 and 2021, the real difference in affordability was really driven by the OSFI rules. Even though our prices were totally different, interest rates were 11.5%. Down payments are a much higher requirement. The bank of mom and dad playing the game. But without the OSFI rules, the actual affordability quotient was pretty close. So I'm not saying OSFI comes off. Quite the opposite. It's very, very important because we've got rate shocks coming. That'll be a year away, and we'll have to deal with that together with inflation. But the opportunities abound. It's going right back to my original comment. In crisis, there's opportunity. We're going to have to find it, and then we need a coordinated effort to do it. By the way, this isn't going to happen at any one singular municipality or any one singular level of government or any particular stakeholder. We all are in this together, and we need to find these solutions. We need to find them quickly, because Toronto could price itself very quickly as a non-competitive market in North America. And that's, I think, what's at risk. But opportunities do abound, particularly towards the end of 21 and into 2022.
Jeannie, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Barbara, thank you, Andy. Some great insights. Barbara, what are your thoughts on market opportunities looking forward in the high-rise world that you're in?
The pandemic caused havoc with many aspects of our lives, including immigration. And to counteract the shortage of immigrants who make up most of our labor force growth, back in May, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship announced an innovative pathway to permanent residence for more than 90,000 essential workers and international graduates of Canadian institutions who are contributing actively to our country's economy. Most recently, it was announced that we would welcome 401,000 immigrants annually beginning this year. And that number includes the granting of residence status to foreigners already living in the country, some working at jobs that did not previously qualify them. On the world stage, I see a spotlight shining on Canada to attract people to our way of life. I've said it before, I think it's worth saying again, these people have to live somewhere, put roofs over their heads, and many come with substantial resources that enable them to purchase homes and condominiums. And keep in mind that most newcomers are used to apartment style living. As a result, we will likely see an even bigger demand for new condos in Toronto and other urban centers. Historically, people are drawn to city centers. So as people go back to their places of work, they may want to move back there too. This is especially true with Toronto's infrastructure continually improving. For example, the LRT, the Eglinton LRT. And of course, everyone in the industry has been following COVID protocols. Eventually, when we can talk about the pandemic in the past tense, I believe that people will want to return to their visiting sales offices in person to see, feel, touch as they walk through model suites and homes. There are definitely some investors will prefer to purchase virtually as they aren't interested in waiting in line or, waiting in crowds. But people are inherently social animals, and I believe they will gravitate back to buying in person. And this will place a renewed emphasis on sales offices and physical marketing materials.
Thank you, Barbara. Bader, where are you guys buying? Where do you think the opportunities are?
Look, we're a downtown developer through and through, and I got to stick to my guns on this one. The allure of Toronto and the downtown is at a high. I think anybody who discounted the attractiveness of the city was definitely on the wrong end of the bet. And as we continue to progress our fight against COVID, I think the demand in Toronto, which is already back to pre-COVID demand, is only going to exceed today's numbers. People have a desire to be downtown. People have a desire and an aspiration to be at the corner of Main and Main. And I think for all the reasons Barbara mentioned, the infrastructure, the investment, the lifestyle, the livelihood, all of that surpasses and overcomes the affordability or the relative affordability issue for most buyers. Most buyers will save up for an extra period of time to buy that unit in the downtown core, and we've seen that. Longer term, as I would say, opportunities in the downtown core, call it are spoken for or thin out. Absolutely. Secondary markets, the outer 416 and 905 is where I see longer term opportunity. I think those developments have to be one of two things: transit oriented, so people can get to where they're going without a car. People forget the additional cost of owning and leasing a vehicle when they're pricing in their unit in the 905. But that is, I think, a key differentiator. And then absent that, it has to be a full community if you're going out to secondary markets. A real master plan with all the fixing. I think the single tower sites in the secondary markets are great, but certainly the large master plan where you can sell that lifestyle and show people, a way of living that's urban, that's going to go a long way. And I think those projects will be very successful over the long term.
Great, thank you. Great, some really good insights there. So downtown is the future, but also outer 416-905 potentially. People want that urban lifestyle, but not in the downtown location. Raymond, what are your thoughts on market opportunities in the commercial sector looking forward?
We spend a lot of time helping our clients understand highest and best use and due diligence. So we're seeing a lot of transactions happen and at high prices on redevelopment opportunities for certain sites, because you can never replace a site. You can always replace the use. So what we're seeing is a premium being paid for an office building that may not reflect the current value, but the future value in about 5 to 7 years, as well as anything with excess land, be it office, industrial, retail, or multifamily. So anything on the redevelopment that increases the density, increases income flow, I think there's more opportunity, especially in the GTA and with the transition of some of the neighborhoods and the growth that we're seeing now and as well as the next 5 years.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I guess there's a lot of air rights, aren't there, that are unused right now in our existing sites. Great. Wow. So lots of a lot of variety there in terms of takeaways of market opportunities. So where there's opportunity, there's always risk. So let's talk about market risks looking forward. As you know, we're not done with COVID. And even if in Canada we get done with COVID and the rest of the world doesn't, we're all in this together globally. So what are kind of the key market risks that you're also watching very closely, even though, as you identified, there are these opportunities? I guess the usual, what's keeping you up at night kind of question. Andy, we'll start with you.
I guess the fundamentals really of where we ended up post-COVID, unleashing the genie from the bottle, not genie, G-E-N-I-E, not genie from the bottle, the unleashing inflation at significant levels, that's keeping me up at night. We're at the highest debt levels for consumers at $2.1 trillion, both mortgage and personal debt, that we've had since 2007. And we run the federal debt up to 1.1 trillion, doubled it almost in this period of the last year, and we're running massive deficits. All of this is very inflationary, and the Bank of Canada is trying to ease off on quantitative easing so that they're not going to be buying those government bonds throughout this year. That means you've got a kind of double whammy of inflation coming, pushing costs, the cost of labor and material, and devaluing your dollar, at the same time increasing your carrying cost. So that's not going to happen tomorrow. That's not, I mean, the Bank of Canada has suggested up until yesterday, they were talking fall. Now they're talking a little sooner, and we thought that it would come a little sooner. So the risk factor for all of us going forward on housing is the impact of interest rates and inflation and what that means in 2022. I think we're in for a pretty good run the balance of this year and most of 22. There'll be a real spike in absorption as the first interest rate moves are made. That's just a very classic consumer response. Get in before they go up. And then you're going to have it, depending on how aggressive the Bank of Canada becomes, how world markets respond to the debt created from COVID, the financial markets in particular. That's the real elephant in the room for late 2022 and into 2023. In the meantime, save your cash and buy long-term land, because the land element will be such that even with these pressures of both growth and as Barbara pointed out, new immigration. I would just add on the immigration file to encourage anyone you speak to change the point systems within the immigration. We have a great immigration policy. It's really well founded, really well done. It's admired around the world how we measure people on a point system to enter the country. But the level of points secured for skilled labor is very, very low. So a simple change would be to increase the points, give greater preference to skilled labor, and that will help tremendously the entire industry on the immigration labor shortage that exists. So a couple of comments keeping me up at night.
Yep, oh, and that's a big risk, right, Butter? You've pointed that out and you experienced that on the labor shortage side. So, and yeah, just Andy, just to add to your point, remember there's not only debt at the federal level, but at the provincial and the municipal
Oh.
level as well. We're like
Totally.
awash in debt in this country.
Yeah.
Barbara, what's keeping you up at night? What are the risks that you guys are looking at, watching closely?
Well, the best way to deal with risk is to avoid it. And if you can't avoid it, then mitigate it. So at Baker, we've taken our market research to an entirely new level this year with the introduction of the Baker Insights Group, or BIG for short. We represent many projects across Toronto and the GTA, and we collect data on sales, trends, absorptions, and rescissions. And with our special market advisor, Ben Myers, we're organizing vast amounts of data to produce reports for our client developers to help them mitigate risk. We can assess what works where, what does not. And as market conditions alter, we are prepared to spot trends at the first hint of change. This results in a huge competitive advantage for our clients. It may not eliminate risk altogether, but it certainly mitigates it. But as to what keeps me up at night, I'll reiterate what I said to you in the spring. It's people. I worry about the health and the safety of our staff, our colleagues, our clients, and their clients. We continue to do business as safely as we can. And I can tell you our people at Baker greatly missed coming into the office during the worst of the pandemic. They've missed the nuances of body language and looking people in the eye. Zoom calls can never completely replace in-person meetings. The pandemic has certainly caused a strain for everyone. We may sell bricks and mortars, but people make it all happen.
Thank you, Barbara. Bader, what's keeping you up at night?
I think a lot of it was covered, Jeannie, but the only thing I would say that is going to have long-term impacts, and yeah, it's going to result in inflation, it's going to result in a whole host of things, but it's really the supply chain. The supply chain was something we talked about, I think, in a very high frequency early COVID, and I think we all remember when we were whether going to the grocery store or Home Depot or Canadian Tire, and you couldn't find something. You can multiply that by a factor and apply it for what looks like a number of years on the construction material side. A lot of materials are taking a lot longer to source. Put the cost aside, but what does that actually mean? That means those cranes that we talked about earlier today are in the sky a little bit longer. It means that the cost of these projects is increasing marginally, for every single month that things are delayed. And this might all sound, like it's on the margin, but over the course of a prolonged period of time, it's going to result in real issues. Remember, there's still new condos being sold. There's still things are moving forward to get factory demand to really catch up to that bottleneck that we have today. Requires investment. That requires time. So what keeps me up at night is really that. It's the time. Time equals risk, and that's one thing you can try your darndest to mitigate, but it's tough. And so for me, that's what it is. It's really exposure to market risk over prolonged periods of time on things that we cannot control.
Well, it's supply chain, exactly. I think it's something that's not spoken about enough. We already see in the car industry, right? The plants being shut down because they just can't get parts. So I guess we're not at that stage yet in the housing side, but it sounds like it's getting trickier and trickier over time. Raymond, what are your thoughts? What's keeping you up at night when you look at the commercial markets and investment and looking forward?
Well, specifically for Toronto, and this is my concern before COVID, and I agree with the comments with the supply chain and logistics, but it's access to skilled labor, and we're bringing in a lot of sort of tech companies and diversity of companies, and part of the reason why they're coming in here is the skilled labor force. So if you don't have the affordability housing aspect of it, it's going to have some challenges in bringing those people into Toronto from an employment standpoint. And that's why you saw growth in Montreal, Ottawa, and other markets as well for that type of employment. So having that skilled labor to occupy those positions and for them to have half decent sort of living in the way of shelter and pricing. So it's keeping up that traction for Toronto, being a place that they can get a job, but as well as afford to live. So I think that's going to be an ongoing issue, especially as we still see increasing in housing prices and as well as increasing in pricing and inflation.
Wow, good. Thank you so much, panelists. There's a lot of things to consider there. It's very, it's not just one risk, there's certainly many that we have to keep an eye on. And for a final question, just being mindful of time here, let's end with your market prediction. So take out your crystal balls. And from your industry perspective and based on your personal, market experience, professional experience, we'd love to hear your predictions on where the Toronto real estate market is heading and where it will be perhaps a year from now, a few years from now. And Mel and Edward will bring you back into the discussion as well to get your thoughts on where you see perhaps, the number of cranes and where in the skyline. So Andy, let's start with you. What are your predictions looking forward?
Let me say how much I've enjoyed today's session and working with this group of very insightful and capable people. You're really something, and I take my hat off to you, Jeannie, and the coordination of it. Really well done. My predictions really are sort around what's happening today, which I think we'll see more of the same in 21. The first half, perhaps the first 3 quarters of 22 will be similar until we get a bit shocked by the movement in interest rates and the power of inflation. Those are the shocks ahead of us. They won't really take hold in a major way until 2023, but it'll dramatically increase supply of resale housing. It'll dramatically have an impact on our ability to deliver at affordable pricing. So I come back to my original comment, which was the feds should stay in the lane, which they're really good at, which is providing financing and financial support, particularly in neighborhoods of social housing and roads, transit, sewer, water, infrastructure. Critical. And we need to focus that on a supply management program driven by, I think, a national conference on the housing crisis / opportunity of supply, or even a Royal Commission, which I think would be really appropriate for the stakeholders. I think we're in a really serious issue here, and not for the next 2 years, but I'm thinking 5 to 10 years, and I'm thinking about my kids, and my kids are the ones who are going to be burdened with this massive debt to pay for, and where will my children live? And if they haven't already got into the housing game, they're not going to, and that's a tragic future ahead of us for Toronto. So this needs to be examined. It's a war, as Peter Gilgan said. I was amazed when he said that his sales offices, I'm not surprised actually, because many of ours are the same, are closed more often than they're open because we're selling out so quickly. But it's so that means it's kind of a good news story in the short term and real concern in the longer term. And we need to focus on it. We have to do something about it this time. We have to make something happen. Words aren't good enough. Action's essential.
Great, thank you, Andy. Barbara, what does your crystal ball tell you looking forward?
It tells me that new pre-sale condominium demand will increase, especially with immigration opening again. I think we will see even more demand for new homes and condos in Toronto and the GTA, especially with the international students coming back. Throughout the pandemic, our phenomenally low mortgage interest rates have helped people buy homes and condos, whether they're entering the marketplace or they're seasoned investors. This is a major reason why the pandemic has not put a halt to sales. People want to get in now while the rates are still so low. But remember too that our condo buyers They buy today, and they buy properties that won't close for several years. Our investors never know what the mortgage rates are going to be, yet every year we close on thousands of units, and somehow, because of the equity that they've earned, investors find ways to close deals. We experience very little fallout on our deals that we made 5-6 years ago. So a year from now, hopefully, the pandemic will be a thing of the past, and our governments will have taken action to ease the housing supply situation. New condo prices probably will be higher, as I doubt that the supply-demand conundrum will be completely solved by then. And in addition, construction costs will likely continue to rise. Overall, our economy and GDP growth may be somewhat higher as industries come back from the pandemic impact.
Thank you, Barbara. Badr, what does your crystal ball tell you?
Oh, Jeannie, I hate making predictions, but I'm usually wrong. That's why. But look, I think the two things I can say with some confidence is a year from now, probably 2 years from now, we're still going to have a housing supply issue. That's not a problem we're going to solve overnight. I think the second one, building off of what Andy and Barbara said, home prices are probably going to continue rising, and they're going to continue rising because of the input costs, but also because of the introduction of new government measures. I'm thinking about inclusionary zoning in particular. So the cost to new home buyers is unfortunately going to go up. Those are my two predictions, and my last one. And this is really taking the crystal ball. I don't see wage growth catching up for the masses, and I think that makes me really pause.
Great, thank you. Raymond, what's your crystal ball tell you for the commercial markets looking ahead?
On the positive side, I think continued strong demand on the industrial side and multifamily and retail, sort of a repositioning investment will remain strong. The only concern is the office sector is going to take a little while to sort itself out with the hybrid work from home model, and whether or not it works with people not coming into the office. Because it's similar to what Barbara said. I believe in that collaboration, need to meet your colleagues face to face to have more ideas. So I think the office market is going to remain at a certain level for at least 6 to 9 months until we figure out and people are more comfortable in getting on public transit and coming back downtown, and somebody needs to figure out how to get people up those elevators. But I think there's going to be a little bit of uncertainty there. But so far, we've seen on the office market in the urban areas some positive aspect into the occupancy levels are starting to come up again, and you're seeing the traffic on the highways. So I think it's going to be sort of good, and remains to be seen on the office side, but it's heading in the right direction.
Okay, great. Mel, what are your thoughts in your next crane report? What do you think we're going to see?
Oh, Jeannie, more of the same. I know we've got 3 projects, low-rise residential projects in the city on the boards right now, and or in at least the pre-construction stage. And they're all from outside of the city, developers looking into the city for their next project. So I think we're going to see more of the same. There's at least 3 there. I know there's a 4th one coming that potentially are going to add to the crane count. Yeah, no, I think these guys have covered the bases in terms of what we're going to see in the short term. It's the long term. How is this going to impact, the 905 as migration continues out there, puts pressure on infrastructure. TTC is doing a bunch of work. Metrolinks are really busy. They're struggling with some budgets right now, but they're all busy. We're going to see airports come back online, right, with new work, commercial work in the future. So yeah, it's all good for construction, I think. But yeah, it's all going to have, kind of that collaborative impact of skill shortage, right? The the construction industry needs more people in it for sure. That's even going to feed the housing market or continue to feed it. So I think in the long run it's good, but Andrew's right. Spin it out 3 or 4 years and we may be looking at something much different.
Mhm. And Edward, I know we're running out of time, but last word to you. What's your prediction looking forward?
All right, well, in the introduction, I showed that we see about 1,100 projects proposed, so there's definitely coming. If you look at the history of Toronto, take a look at a graph from the day it was founded, the numbers of population have been going up, up, up. There's never really been a decline. If you're looking at 100,000 new people to the GTA every year, they got to live here, they got to live somewhere, they got to work somewhere. I think as long as Canada remains a great place to live and a great place to, raise kids and all that, work and stuff, people will keep coming to this country. 400,000 new people a year, and most of them want to come here. I can't see how, interest rates or this or that are really gonna, over longer term, and I'm talking about the next 100 years, there's no reason why we won't be continuing along this path. Wonderful.
Well, it's 1:15, believe it or not. Time has flown. I've taken a lot of notes. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I always learn so much just listening to you speak, and I hope our audience out there also enjoyed the discussion. So on behalf of ULI Toronto, thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. And as you can see, we've got some upcoming events coming up at ULI Toronto. Always something happening at ULI Toronto. So please check them out. You can see the links in the chat, I believe, and we look forward to seeing you in a future webinar. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe. COVID is not over yet, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.